The alarm on Dock 7 screamed so loud that my teeth hurt. Red light bounced off the metal walls, and every alien in the corridor scattered like startled birds. I was halfway up a ladder, trying to fix a busted coolant line on a cargo hauler, when the whole station shook from a pressure drop 3 levels below me. My name is Ryan Cole. I fix ships for a living on Halvin Station, a trading post floating at the edge of nowhere, where a dozen different species haggle, trade, and mostly try to avoid looking at each other for too long. I am not a soldier. I am not a hero. I am the guy who tightens bolts and curses at leaking pipes. The alarm cut off after 10 seconds. A voice on the intercom announced that the pressure breach had been sealed and that everyone should return to their business. Typical Halvin Station. Something almost kills you, and then everyone is told to just get back to work like nothing happened. I climbed down the ladder, wiped grease off my hands, and turned around to grab my tool bag. That was when I saw her. She was standing so close that I almost tripped backward into the ladder. She was small, maybe 3 feet tall, with pale blue skin that looked like it had never seen direct sunlight, and large black eyes that seemed too big for her narrow face. She wore a simple gray robe, the kind of thing that looked handmade rather than store-bought. Her hands were folded in front of her like she was about to give a formal speech at a funeral. "Are you Ryan Cole?" she asked. Her voice was soft but clear, like she had practiced the question many times before saying it out loud. "Yeah," I said, still catching my breath from the alarm. "Who wants to know?" She did not blink. Aliens rarely do the same things humans expect, but the way she stared at me made me feel like I was being examined by a doctor who already knew the diagnosis and was just waiting to deliver the bad news. "I have been assigned to you," she said, "as your bride." I stood there for a second, waiting for the joke. Halvin Station had all kinds of pranks going around, especially aimed at humans, since we were still fairly new to this part of the galaxy, and most species did not fully understand our customs. Someone once convinced a new human trader that shaking hands with a Voran merchant meant he had agreed to buy the merchant's entire cargo hold. It took him 3 days and a very awkward meeting with station security to get out of that one. "Okay," I said slowly. "Very funny. Who put you up to this? Was it Denny from the parts shop? He owes me for that oxygen regulator I fixed last week." The small alien tilted her head slightly, the way a bird does when it hears an unfamiliar sound. "I do not understand this reference," she said. "I am not part of a joke. My name is Syl. I am of the Ithra people. I was told this morning that I have been matched to you under the Halvin Accord, Section 12, regarding species protection through bonded unions." I laughed, mostly out of nerves. "Look, Syl, I think there's been some kind of mistake. I've never even heard of your people before today, and I definitely never signed up for any accord about bonded unions." "Humans signed the Halvin Accord 8 years ago," she said. "It was part of the agreement that allowed your species docking rights on this station, and 11 others in the sector. I do not think you read the full document." That part actually made me pause. 8 years ago, humanity was desperate to get a foothold anywhere in this part of space. We had just been let into the wider galactic community, and every scrap of paper handed to our diplomats got signed almost without question. Because refusing meant getting shut out entirely. I was not a diplomat. I was barely even someone who followed galactic news. But it did not sound impossible that we had agreed to something without fully understanding what it meant. Still, an actual bride assignment sounded like something from an old story, not something that happened on a Tuesday morning to a ship mechanic covered in engine grease. "Even if that's true," I said, "why me? I'm nobody. I fix ships. I don't even own my own quarters. I rent a bunk from the station." "The matching system does not choose based on wealth or status," Syl said. "It chooses based on need and availability. My clan requested protection 3 days ago. You were listed as an eligible human on this station who had not yet formed a bonded union with anyone. So I just got picked because I happened to be single." "Yes," she said, without any hint of embarrassment. "That is exactly correct." I rubbed my forehead, feeling a headache creeping in that had nothing to do with the earlier alarm. Around us, the corridor had mostly cleared out, but a few aliens were still watching from a distance, whispering to each other in languages I did not understand. I noticed a Voran trader nudge his companion and point directly at us. "Why does this feel like everyone already knows about this except me?" I asked. "Word travels quickly on this station," Syl said, "especially anything involving humans. Your species has a reputation. What kind of reputation? She paused before answering, and for the first time since she had walked up to me, something in her expression shifted. It was not fear exactly, but it was close to it. A reputation for being dangerous when provoked, she said quietly, and for protecting what belongs to them without hesitation. I did not know what to say to that. I had never thought of myself as dangerous. I had never been in a real fight in my life, not one that mattered anyway. But something about the way she said it made me realize this conversation was not actually about me at all. It was about something much bigger, something that had been building long before I climbed down that ladder. Look, I said, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was doing something strange in my chest. I think we need to talk to someone at the station office. This has to be some kind of mix-up. I can't just accept a bride I met 5 minutes ago. I understand your hesitation, Syl said. Humans value personal choice highly. This is well documented. But I must tell you something important before you decide to reject the assignment. What's that? If you refuse me, she said, my clan loses its protection status under the Accord. We would be left unprotected in a sector that is not kind to smaller species. I would ask that you at least allow me the chance to explain everything before you make your decision. There was something in the way she said it, some quiet desperation hidden underneath the calm tone, that stopped me from immediately saying no. I looked at her more closely. She was young, or at least she seemed young by whatever standard her people used. Her hands were shaking slightly, even though she kept them folded neatly. She was terrified, I realized. Not of me exactly, but of what would happen if I turned her away. I thought about all the horror stories I had heard about deep space diplomacy, about smaller species getting swallowed up by bigger, hungrier powers the moment nobody was watching. I thought about how easy it would be to just say no, and walk away, and let this become someone else's problem. But I also thought about my own family, back on Earth, and how many times someone had stood up for us when we had nothing to offer in return. Humanity had gotten lucky more than once, thanks to strangers who decided to take a chance on us. All right, I said finally. Let's go talk about this somewhere that isn't a busy hallway with half the station staring at us. Something in Syl's shoulders loosened, just slightly, like she had been bracing for rejection the entire time. Thank you, she said. I will explain everything. I promise you will understand once you know the full situation. I picked up my tool bag, still not entirely sure what I had just agreed to, and gestured for her to follow me toward the mess hall, where at least we could sit down like normal people and figure out how my ordinary Tuesday had turned into something out of a story I never expected to be part of. As we walked, I noticed more eyes following us, more whispers trailing behind. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a small warning bell was ringing, telling me that this was only the very beginning of something much larger than a simple misunderstanding, and that my quiet life fixing engines on Halvin Station had just changed forever. The mess hall on Halvin Station was never quiet, but at that hour it was at least manageable. A few Vorin traders sat hunched over bowls of something steaming and purple, and a pair of Ondu engineers argued quietly about fuel prices near the far wall. Nobody paid us much attention once we sat down, which was exactly what I wanted. Syl sat across from me, her hands still folded, her back straight like she was sitting for an inspection rather than a conversation. I ordered 2 cups of the station's watered-down coffee substitute, mostly because I needed something to hold on to while my brain tried to process the morning. All right, I said, sliding 1 cup toward her even though I had no idea if her species could drink it. Start from the beginning. What exactly is the Halvin Accord, and what did we actually agree to? Syl looked at the cup for a moment, sniffed it carefully, then set it aside without drinking. I decided not to take it personally. The Halvin Accord was signed by your species representatives 8 years ago, she said. It grants humans docking rights, trade access, and protection from certain hostile factions across 12 stations in this sector. In exchange, humanity agreed to several clauses meant to stabilize relations between smaller species and larger governing bodies. And one of those clauses just happens to be about marriage. Bonded union, she corrected gently. It is not exactly the same as your human concept of marriage, though it shares similarities. When a species is too small or too weak to defend itself, it can request protection from a stronger species through a formal bond. The stronger species publicly claims responsibility for the weaker one. Attacking a bonded partner is considered an attack on the entire protecting species. I leaned back in my chair, trying to wrap my head around it. So this isn't really about love or anything like that. It's a legal shield. At first, yes, Sil said. Many bonded unions begin as practical arrangements. Whether they become something more is left up to the individuals involved. I glanced around the mess hall again, noticing how a couple of the Voran traders kept sneaking glances in our direction, whispering to each other behind their hands. Why do people keep staring at us? I asked. Because word has already spread that a human has accepted a bonded union with an Ithra, Sil said. It is considered unusual. Humans rarely take these arrangements, and when they do, they usually choose partners from more prominent species. My people are small in number and considered fragile by most standards in this sector. Fragile how? Sil hesitated before answering, and I noticed her fingers tighten slightly around the edge of the table. My people were once much larger in number. Several decades ago, a hostile faction known as the Doran Combine invaded 3 of our home settlements. We had no defenses capable of stopping them. Since then, the surviving clans have relied on protection agreements with larger species just to continue existing. The way she said it, calm and almost rehearsed, made it clear this was not new information to her. It was simply the reality she had grown up with, the same way I had grown up knowing which neighborhoods back home were safe to walk through at night, and which ones were not. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it, even though the words felt small compared to what she had just described. You do not need to apologize, she said. You did nothing wrong. I only wish for you to understand why this assignment matters so much to my clan. If you reject me, the Doran Combine will see it as a sign of weakness. They watch these things closely. A rejected protection request means my clan no longer has a strong ally standing beside us. I thought about that for a long moment, staring down at the cup of fake coffee in my hands. Back on Earth, I had grown up hearing stories about neighbors who looked out for each other during hard times, who showed up with food or tools or a spare bed, without being asked twice. It was one of the few things about humanity I had always been proud of, even during the years when everything else about the world felt uncertain. Okay, I said finally. Let's say I agree to this. What happens next? Do you just move into my bunk? Do we have some kind of ceremony? I don't exactly have space for 2 people. For the first time since we had met, something close to a small smile crossed Sil's face. It was brief, barely there, but it changed her entire expression. There is a simple registration process at the station office, she said. After that, according to Ithra custom, I would move into your living space, and we would begin learning each other's habits and customs. It is expected that both partners adjust to accommodate one another. Great, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I hope you don't mind protein packs and terrible coffee, because that's basically my entire diet. I do not require the same nutrition as humans, Sil said. I will need my own supplies, but I do not think this will be a significant issue. We spent the next hour at that table, working through logistics that felt strangely mundane, considering how unusual the entire situation was. She asked about my daily schedule, and I asked about what kinds of food her people ate. She explained that Ithra were naturally cautious by nature, startled easily by loud noises, and preferred quiet spaces whenever possible. I explained that ship engines were loud, station alarms were louder, and unfortunately both were a big part of my daily life. By the time we walked to the station office to complete the registration, word had clearly spread even further. A station clerk named Marla Dunn processed our paperwork with wide eyes, glancing between us like she was trying to memorize every detail so she could tell someone else about it later. Congratulations, Marla said, though her tone suggested she was more confused than happy for us. You're now officially recognized under Accord protections. Try to keep the paperwork updated if either of your circumstances change. Walking back to my quarters with Sil trailing quietly behind me, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle into my chest. A few hours ago, I had been a mechanic worried about a coolant leak. Now I was apparently responsible for the safety of an entire alien clan I had never even heard of before that morning. My quarters were small, barely enough space for 1 person, let alone 2. A narrow bunk sat against one wall, a fold-down desk against another, and just enough floor space to walk from one side to the other without turning sideways. Sil stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the tiny room with an expression I could not quite read. "This is smaller than I expected," she said. "Yeah, well, mechanics don't exactly get luxury housing," I said, feeling oddly defensive about my own living space. "I can request a bigger unit now that we're registered, but it might take a few days to process." "It is fine," Sil said quickly. I did not mean to sound ungrateful. My previous living space was smaller than this. That night, I gave her the bunk and set up a sleeping mat on the floor, which she initially protested until I made it clear I was not going to change my mind about it. She settled onto the bunk carefully, still fully dressed in her gray robe, watching me with those large dark eyes as I turned off the main light and left only a small emergency lamp glowing near the door. "Ryan," she said quietly into the dim room. "Yeah?" "Thank you for not rejecting me," she said. "I was prepared for you to say no." I stared up at the ceiling of my tiny quarters, listening to the distant hum of the station's life support systems. "Honestly," I said, "I'm still not entirely sure what I just agreed to. But my mom always told me that when someone asks for help and you're able to give it, you don't turn them away just because it's inconvenient." Sil was quiet for a moment. "Your mother sounds wise." "She had her moments," I said, smiling slightly in the dark. The next few days settled into a strange rhythm. Seal accompanied me during my work shifts whenever possible, sitting quietly nearby while I repaired engines and coolant systems, watching everything with careful curiosity. She flinched every time a pressure valve hissed loudly or a metal panel clanged shut, but she never left, never asked to be somewhere quieter instead. I learned that she preferred her food lightly warmed rather than hot, that she hummed softly to herself when she was nervous, and that she had an impressive memory for technical details, often reciting engine specifications back to me after only hearing them once. She learned that I talked to myself while working, that I hated the powdered eggs served in the mess hall, and that I had a habit of humming old songs from Earth that she had never heard before but seemed to enjoy listening to anyway. One afternoon, a Voran merchant named Brax approached us near the docking bay. His expression twisted into something between amusement and disdain. He was known around the station for being difficult, the kind of trader who tried to squeeze extra credits out of every deal whenever possible. "So the little Ithra finally found herself a keeper," Brax said, looking Sil up and down like she was an item on display rather than a person standing beside me. "Lucky for her. Most bonded partners from weak species end up doing all the work while their human just collects the benefits." Something in his tone made my jaw tighten immediately. Sil stepped slightly closer to me, her earlier confidence during our conversations replaced by something smaller, more cautious. "That's not how this works," I said, keeping my voice level even though irritation was building fast in my chest. "She's not property, and she's definitely not doing anyone's work for free." Brax raised his hands in mock surrender, a thin smile still plastered across his face. "No offense meant, mechanic. Just making conversation. Word of advice though, protect your investment. Word travels fast that a Doran Combine ship docked here last week. They don't take kindly to Ithra clans finding new allies." He walked away before I could respond, leaving a heavy silence behind him. I looked down at Sil, noticing how her hands had returned to their familiar nervous position, folded tightly in front of her. "Is that true?" I asked. "About the Doran ship?" "I did not know they had docked here," Sil said, her voice quieter than before. "If they are watching, it means they already know about our bond. Should we be worried?" Sil looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something in her expression that looked less like fear and more like quiet determination. "I do not know yet," she said, "but I believe we should be careful." That evening, back in the small quarters that were slowly starting to feel less like mine alone and more like ours, I found myself thinking less about coolant lines and engine repairs, and more about what exactly I had signed up to protect, and what kind of danger might already be watching us from somewhere else on the station. 3 days after the encounter with Brax, I woke up to find Sil already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor mat instead of the bunk, staring at the small emergency lamp like it held answers to questions she had not asked yet. "You didn't sleep," I said, rubbing the sleep out of my own eyes. "I did not want to," she admitted. "I kept thinking about what the merchant said, about the Doran ship." I sat up, letting the blanket fall around my waist, and studied her face in the dim light. There was something different about her that morning, a heaviness that had not been there before. "Tell me about them," I said. "The Doran Combine. I want to understand exactly what we're dealing with." Syl was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I wondered if she was going to answer at all. Then she began speaking, slowly at first, like she was pulling each word up from somewhere deep and painful. "My people were not always small in number," she said. 3 generations ago, the Ithra controlled 4 settlements across 2 systems. We were not warriors, but we were skilled builders and traders. Other species respected our craftsmanship, especially our work with pressure-sealed habitats, since our homeworld has a naturally thin atmosphere. "What happened?" "The Doran Combine arrived seeking territory," she said. "They are a species built for expansion, always searching for new systems to claim, new resources to extract. They approached our elders first, offering trade agreements that sounded reasonable. We agreed, not realizing their true intention was to gain access to our settlements before taking them by force." I felt my stomach tighten, already sensing where this story was heading. "Within a single season, they seized control of 2 of our 4 settlements," Syl continued. "They claimed our habitats, forced surviving clans into labor arrangements, and used our own construction techniques against us to expand their reach further into the system. It took years before other species intervened, and by then, more than half our population had been lost, either through the takeover itself or through the harsh conditions that followed." Her voice remained steady throughout the explanation, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "The Halvan Accord came after that," she continued. "A coalition of species, including some who had ignored our situation for too long, finally agreed that smaller populations needed formal protection agreements to prevent similar situations from happening again. Humanity joining the Accord was actually seen as a positive sign by many species, since your people had no prior history with the Doran Combine and were considered unpredictable enough to make them cautious." "Unpredictable how?" I asked, remembering she had used a similar word before. Syl hesitated again before answering. "There is an incident from your species, early days in this sector, that is spoken about often, though rarely with full accuracy. A human trading vessel was boarded by pirates near a neutral station, seeking to steal cargo and take hostages for ransom. The crew, only 12 humans total, refused to surrender despite being outnumbered nearly 5 to 1. They fought back with whatever tools and equipment they had available, eventually disabling the pirate vessel entirely and turning the tables on their attackers." "That doesn't sound too unusual," I said. "People fight back when they're threatened." "The unusual part," Syl said, "is that afterward, the surviving pirates were found completely unharmed, tied up and waiting for station security, while the cargo remained untouched. Your crew members had every opportunity and justification to cause serious harm to their attackers, yet chose restraint, even in victory. Many species found this more unsettling than if the humans had simply overpowered them through force. It suggested a level of discipline and control that made humanity difficult to predict or provoke without consequence." I sat with that for a moment, trying to imagine the story from an outside perspective. To an alien species used to either overwhelming force or complete submission, the idea of a smaller group choosing calculated restraint over easy revenge probably did seem strange, even frightening in its own way. "So basically," I said slowly, "humans got this reputation for being dangerous, not because we go looking for trouble, but because we don't back down when trouble finds us, and we don't always react the way people expect." "That is a fair summary," Syl said. "It is also why my clan requested protection from a human specifically, rather than another species. The Doran Combine respects strength, but they fear unpredictability even more. A human-bonded partner sends a clear signal that attacking my clan carries risks they cannot easily calculate." Before I could respond, a sharp knock echoed against my quarters door, firm and deliberate, nothing like the casual taps from station maintenance staff. Syl's entire posture stiffened immediately, her earlier calm replaced by something close to panic. I stood up, pulled on my work jacket over my sleep shirt, and opened the door carefully. Standing in the corridor was a tall figure I did not recognize, dressed in dark gray armor plating that looked far too formal for casual station wear. His skin was a deep shade of green, and his eyes carried a cold, calculating quality that immediately put me on edge. "Ryan Cole," the figure said, his voice deep and measured. "My name is Grath. I represent trade interests for the Doran Combine, operating in this sector. How can I help you? I asked, keeping my tone neutral, even though every instinct told me this conversation was not going to be friendly. I understand you have recently entered a bonded union with an Ithra clan member, Grath said, glancing past me toward where Syl stood frozen near the bunk. I wish to speak with you directly regarding certain misunderstandings that may exist about our organization's intentions in this region. I'm listening, I said, though I made no move to invite him inside. The Doran Combine has significant trade interests near several Ithra settlements, Grath explained. We believe recent tensions have been exaggerated by outside parties seeking to disrupt our legitimate business operations. Your bonded partner's clan has been resistant to reasonable negotiations regarding resource sharing agreements. Resource sharing, I repeated flatly. That's an interesting way to describe what she told me happened to her clan a few generations ago. Grath's expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened slightly. History is often remembered selectively, mechanic. I am simply here to suggest that involving yourself further in these matters may complicate an otherwise straightforward business situation. It would be wise to encourage your bonded partner's clan toward more cooperative discussions. That's not really my decision to make, I said. She's not property, and I'm not going to pressure her into anything on your behalf. Grath studied me for a long moment, and I got the distinct impression he was recalculating something in his head, adjusting whatever plan he had walked in with. Very well, he said finally. I simply wish to introduce myself and clarify our position before any further misunderstandings occur. I trust you will consider our conversation carefully. Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back down the corridor, his footsteps echoing with deliberate confidence, until he disappeared around the corner. I closed the door and turned back to Syl, who had not moved from her spot near the bunk, her hands pressed tightly against her chest. That was Grath, she said quietly, before I could even ask. He is known among Ithra clans. He negotiated the original agreements that led to our settlements being taken generations ago. He's still around after all this time. Doran lifespans are considerably longer than humans, Syl explained. He has likely overseen negotiations with dozens of smaller species over many decades, always using the same careful language, always framing invasion as cooperation. I felt anger building in my chest, a slow burning frustration at watching someone speak in calm, measured tones while describing what amounted to threats wrapped in polite business language. What do you think he actually wants? I asked. I believe he is testing how seriously you take our bond, Syl said. If he can convince you to pressure my clan into unfavorable agreements, it proves the accord protection means little in practice. If he cannot convince you, he will likely escalate his approach. Escalate how? Syl's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw genuine fear there, not just nervousness or caution, but real fear. The Doran Combine does not typically resort to direct confrontation against protected species without significant provocation, she said. However, they have been known to create situations that appear to justify intervention. An accident, perhaps, or an incident that could be blamed on my clan's own negligence, giving them justification to move against our remaining settlement. I thought about that possibility, about someone deliberately engineering a disaster just to create an excuse for taking what they wanted anyway. It was a level of calculated cruelty that made my earlier anger feel almost inadequate. We need to tell station security about this conversation, I said. At the very least, there should be a record of it somewhere official. Station security has limited jurisdiction regarding accord matters, Syl said. They can document incidents, but enforcement typically falls to representatives from the protecting species involved, meaning humans in this case. Great, I muttered. So basically, it's on me to figure out how to handle a centuries-old business empire that specializes in slowly crushing smaller species through legal loopholes and manufactured disasters. I did not intend for this responsibility to fall so heavily on you, Syl said, her voice small. When I accepted this assignment, I hoped it would simply provide a legal shield, nothing more. I did not expect the Doran Combine to respond so quickly. I sat down on the edge of the bunk, running my hands through my hair, trying to think through the situation logically, rather than emotionally. Growing up, my father had always told me that the worst mistakes happened when people reacted out of fear or anger, instead of taking a moment to think clearly first. Okay, I said finally, let's think about this carefully. What resources do we actually have? You mentioned other species helped establish the original accord. Are there other protected clans on this station who might have dealt with similar pressure before? Sil considered the question for a moment. There is a Voran trading family, the Karsu clan, who assisted in drafting portions of the original accord language. They are not directly involved with Ithra matters, but they have experience navigating Doran negotiation tactics. Then that's our first step, I said. We talk to them, we document everything Grath said today, and we make it clear that any attempt to manufacture some kind of incident against your clan will be treated as a direct violation of the accord, with full documentation, ready to present to whatever authority oversees these agreements. For the first time since Grath's visit, some of the tension in Sil's shoulders eased slightly. That is a reasonable plan, she said, though I fear reasonable plans do not always stop determined opponents. No, I agreed, but it's a start, and we're not doing this alone anymore. If word about our bond has already spread across the station like you said, other people probably know what's happening too. Maybe some of them will be willing to help. We spent the rest of that day moving between different sections of the station, speaking quietly with various contacts Sil knew from her clan's dealings, documenting everything Grath had said as accurately as possible, and reaching out to the Karsu trading family for guidance on how to formally respond to what increasingly felt like a deliberate threat disguised as diplomatic courtesy. By evening, exhausted and mentally drained from hours of careful, measured conversations, we returned to our small quarters, both of us aware that whatever calm existed before had officially ended the moment Grath knocked on our door. Ryan, Sil said quietly as we settled in for the night, her voice hesitant, I need to ask you something honestly. Go ahead. Do you regret accepting this bond? She asked, knowing now what it might cost you. I thought about the question seriously before answering, because she deserved an honest answer rather than an automatic reassurance. No, I said finally. I won't lie and say I'm not scared about what might happen next, but I don't regret it. You needed help, and turning you away just because things got complicated afterward isn't who I want to be. Sil was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke again, her voice carried a warmth that had not been there before. Thank you, she said simply. Outside our small quarters, the station continued its usual rhythm of trade and business, unaware that somewhere in its quiet corners, a decision was already forming that would soon test exactly how far that reputation for human unpredictability actually extended. 4 days after Grath's visit, the manufactured incident Sil had warned about finally arrived, though it did not happen the way either of us expected. I was working a double shift in the docking bay, repairing a damaged thruster on a cargo vessel, when my communicator buzzed with an emergency alert from the station's environmental control system. A pressure seal failure had been reported in the residential section, where the small Ithra trading post was located, the same section where several clan elders, including Sil's own family contacts, conducted their limited business dealings on the station. I dropped my tools immediately and ran, my heart pounding harder with every step through the crowded corridors. By the time I reached the residential section, a small crowd had already gathered near a sealed doorway, station security officers, attempting to hold everyone back while emergency technicians worked on what appeared to be a malfunctioning pressure valve. Sil was already there, pushed to the front of the crowd, her hands pressed against the transparent viewing panel that separated the corridor from the affected chamber. Behind the glass, I could see 2 Ithra elders coughing, clearly struggling, as thin wisps of atmosphere leaked from a damaged seal near the ceiling. What happened? I asked, pushing through the crowd to reach her side. The seal failed without warning, Sil said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. This system passed inspection only 3 days ago. It should not have failed like this. A station technician working nearby, a stocky woman named Petra Voss, glanced up from her equipment console with a frustrated expression. The damage pattern doesn't match normal wear, she said, mostly to herself, though loud enough for us to hear. This looks deliberate, like something was tampered with from the maintenance access panel. That single sentence confirmed everything Sil had feared. This was not an accident. Someone had engineered this failure specifically, likely hoping the resulting chaos would either harm the elders directly or create enough confusion to justify some kind of intervention afterward. Can you get them out? I asked Petra, watching the elders through the glass with growing concern. Working on it, she said, her fingers moving rapidly across her control panel. The backup seal mechanism should engage within a few minutes, but the primary damage needs to be manually reset from inside the maintenance corridor. I can do that, I said immediately. I've worked pressure seal systems before on cargo vessels. Just tell me what I'm looking at. Petra glanced at me skeptically for a moment, before nodding, quickly pulling up a schematic on her console and pointing toward a narrow maintenance access point, a short distance down the corridor. The manual override switch is inside that access panel, she said, but you'll need to move fast. Once you're inside, you'll have limited atmosphere, until the backup system fully engages. I did not hesitate. I moved toward the access panel, ignoring the concerned protests from station security officers who tried to stop me from entering an area they considered too dangerous for civilians. Sil grabbed my arm briefly before I stepped inside. "Ryan, please be careful," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will be," I promised, squeezing her hand once before pulling the access panel open and stepping into the narrow maintenance corridor beyond. The space inside was cramped, filled with exposed wiring and pipes running along every surface. I could hear the faint hiss of escaping atmosphere somewhere nearby, and my ears popped uncomfortably as the pressure shifted around me. Following the schematic Petra had shown me, I located the manual override switch exactly where she said it would be, though the panel covering it looked freshly disturbed, scratch marks visible around its edges that suggested someone had recently accessed it without authorization. I worked quickly, my hands moving through the familiar motions of engine repair despite the unfamiliar setting, resetting the damaged connections one by one, while my chest grew tighter from the thinning atmosphere around me. After what felt like much longer than it probably actually was, the override switch clicked into place, and I heard the distant hum of the backup pressure system engaging fully throughout the chamber. I stumbled back out of the maintenance corridor just as station security finished evacuating the two elders to safety, both of them shaken but otherwise unharmed. Sil rushed toward me immediately, checking me over with visible concern even though I assured her repeatedly that I was fine. "You should not have gone in there alone," she said, though her tone carried more relief than actual criticism. "Someone had to," I said simply. And I was the closest person who knew what they were looking at. Petra approached us a few minutes later, her expression grim, as she reviewed data from her console. "I've confirmed it," she said. "This was definitely tampered with, not a random malfunction. Whoever did this knew exactly which system to target and when the elders would be inside." Word of the incident spread across the station faster than I expected, and within hours, a very different crowd began gathering near our quarters, one that surprised me far more than any hostile alien negotiator ever could have. Marcus Webb, the station's human security supervisor, a broad-shouldered man with a permanently tired expression, was the first to arrive, along with two other human traders I recognized from around the docking bays, but had never spoken with directly. "Heard what happened," Marcus said, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by something more serious. "Heard someone tried to make it look like an accident, too." "Yeah," I said. "Someone tampered with the pressure seal, specifically targeting Ithra elders." Marcus's jaw tightened noticeably. "That's not going to sit well with folks around here," he said. "Doesn't matter that they're not human. Word travels fast about someone messing with a bonded partner's people." I glanced between the small group gathered around us, confused by the sudden show of solidarity from humans I barely knew. "I don't understand," I said. "Why does everyone suddenly care so much?" One of the traders, a woman named Diane Marsh who ran a small supply shop near the docking bays, stepped forward with a determined expression. "Because that's just how it works," she said simply. "You're one of ours now, and so is she by extension. Someone messes with family, the whole family shows up. Doesn't matter if we've met before or not." The simplicity of her explanation struck something deep in my chest, a reminder of exactly the kind of instinctive loyalty my mother had always talked about, the kind that did not require elaborate justification or careful calculation, just an immediate recognition that someone needed backup and showing up to provide it. Over the following hours, more humans from across the station gathered near the residential section, some offering security assistance, others simply standing as a visible presence that made it clear any further attempts against Sil's clan would not go unnoticed or unanswered. Grath appeared again that evening, this time accompanied by two additional Doran representatives, his earlier calm demeanor replaced by something more calculating as he took in the growing crowd of humans surrounding our quarters. "This is quite an impressive gathering," he said, his tone carefully neutral, despite the obvious tension in his posture. "I trust today's unfortunate incident has not created any misunderstandings between our organizations." "Cut the diplomatic language, Grath," I said, stepping forward with more confidence than I actually felt inside. "We both know that Pressure Seal didn't fail on its own. Station security already confirmed it was tampered with deliberately." Grath's expression flickered slightly, though he maintained his composed exterior. "Accidents happen in maintenance systems more often than people realize," he said. "I would caution against making accusations without concrete evidence." Marcus Webb stepped forward beside me, his security uniform adding official weight to his presence. "We've got the maintenance logs, the tampering marks, and eyewitness accounts from station technicians," he said flatly. "Evidence is already being compiled for formal review under Accord violation protocols." Grath studied the growing crowd around us for a long moment, clearly recalculating his approach given the unexpected show of unified support. Whatever plan he had walked in expecting, this level of immediate solidarity from an entire section of the station's human population was obviously not part of it. "It appears there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding our organization's intentions," Grath said finally, his tone shifting toward something more careful. "The Doran Combine has no interest in creating unnecessary conflict with humanity or its protected allies. I will ensure this matter is investigated thoroughly on our end as well." "You do that," I said, "but understand something clearly. Any further incidents involving Sill's clan will be treated as a direct provocation, and I don't think either of us wants to find out what that actually means in practice." Grath's eyes narrowed slightly at that, studying me with renewed calculation, though he said nothing further. After a tense moment, he turned and walked away, his two companions following closely behind, disappearing into the station's crowded corridors without another word. The crowd around us slowly began to disperse once the immediate tension passed, though several people lingered nearby, offering quiet words of support to Sill as they left. She stood beside me throughout the entire exchange, her earlier fear replaced by something steadier, a quiet strength that had not been visible during our very first conversation days earlier. "I did not expect this," she admitted once we were finally alone again, walking back toward our quarters through the now quiet corridor. "I knew humans had a reputation for loyalty, but I did not expect to witness it so directly, especially towards someone they had never even met before today." "That's just how it works with us," I said, echoing Diane's earlier words. "Once someone's family, even by accident or arrangement, people show up." Sill was quiet for a moment, processing that idea carefully. "Then perhaps the Halvan Accord was wiser than even its original drafters realized," she said finally. "Choosing humanity as protectors was not simply about unpredictability after all. It was about this instinct you carry, this willingness to defend even strangers without hesitation." I thought about that as we walked, about how a simple assignment I had reluctantly accepted only days earlier had somehow revealed something meaningful about my own species that I had never fully appreciated until watching it play out firsthand. That night, as we settled into our small quarters once again, the immediate danger from Grath's visit finally behind us for the moment, I felt a quiet certainty settle over me, a recognition that whatever challenges still lay ahead, we would not be facing them alone. 3 weeks passed after the incident with the Pressure Seal, and life on Halvan Station slowly settled into a new kind of normal, one that looked very different from the quiet, uneventful routine I had known before Sill walked into my life. The formal complaint Marcus Webb helped file against the Doran Combine moved through several layers of Accord review committees, slower than any of us would have liked, but steady enough that word eventually came back confirming what we already suspected. The tampering evidence was undeniable, and combined with testimony from station technicians and the visible support shown by Halvan's human population, the review committee issued a formal warning against the Doran Combine, along with strict monitoring requirements for any future dealings involving Ithra clans across the sector. It was not a perfect resolution. Grath and his associates remained active in other parts of the galaxy, likely searching for smaller, less protected targets elsewhere. But for Sill's clan specifically, the message had been sent clearly enough that their settlement remained untouched, their elders safe, and their trading operations on Halvan Station continuing without further interference. During those same 3 weeks, something else had been quietly changing as well, something that had nothing to do with formal committees or accord protocols. Sil no longer flinched every time a pressure valve hissed nearby. She had grown comfortable enough in our shared quarters to rearrange the small shelf near the door according to her own preferences, filling it with a few personal items she had slowly gathered from her clan's trading post. She had also started humming along quietly whenever I sang old Earth songs while working, even attempting the words occasionally, though her pronunciation always came out slightly off, in a way that made me smile rather than correct her. For my part, I had learned to recognize the subtle differences in her moods, the way her hands folded more tightly when she was anxious, the way her shoulders relaxed completely, only when she felt genuinely safe. I had learned that she preferred quiet mornings before the station's daily trade rush began, and that she found a strange comfort in watching cargo ships dock and depart from the observation deck, something she described as reminding her of the steady rhythm her people once had before everything changed. One evening, after a particularly long shift repairing a damaged fuel line, I returned to our quarters to find Sil sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully arranging what looked like small woven strips of fabric into an intricate pattern. "What's that?" I asked, setting down my tool bag and settling onto the floor beside her. "It is called a joining cloth," she explained, holding up the partially completed pattern for me to see. "Among my people, when a bonded union transitions from practical arrangement to something more meaningful, both partners create one of these together, as part of a small ceremony." I studied the intricate weaving pattern more closely, noticing the careful precision in each fold and twist of fabric. "It's beautiful," I said, "but I have absolutely no idea how to make something like this." Sil smiled softly, an expression that had become more common over the past few weeks. "I did not expect you to know already," she said. "I intended to teach you, if you were willing to learn." Something in the careful way she asked the question, hesitant despite how far we had come together, told me this moment meant something significant to her. "Sil," I said, setting aside the tool bag I had barely put down moments earlier, "are you asking me what I think you're asking me?" Her cheeks, or whatever the equivalent was for Ithra skin, seemed to darken slightly, a subtle blue flush spreading across her narrow features. "I am asking if our bond has become something more than a practical arrangement for you," she said carefully. "I understand if it has not. I do not wish to pressure you into feelings you do not genuinely hold." I thought back to that very first morning, standing in a busy corridor covered in engine grease, listening to a stranger calmly announce that she had been assigned to me as a bride. I thought about every quiet evening since then, every shared meal, every moment of genuine trust that had slowly built between two people who came from completely different worlds. "Sil," I said, reaching over to gently take one of her small hands in mine, "I think it became something more a lot sooner than either of us probably wanted to admit." Her large dark eyes met mine, filled with something that looked remarkably like hope. "Then you would be willing to complete the joining ceremony with me? Properly, according to both our customs?" "I'd be honored," I said, meaning every word. Word of our decision spread across Halvin Station almost as quickly as word of our original bond assignment had, though this time the whispers carried a distinctly different tone, curious and warm, rather than confused or skeptical. Marcus Webb offered to help coordinate security for the ceremony, insisting that half the station would probably want to attend, given how much attention our situation had already drawn. Diane Marsh from the supply shop volunteered to help arrange refreshments suitable for both human and Ithra guests, spending hours researching what foods might be safely shared between such different species. Even Petra Voss, the technician who had helped save the elders during the pressure seal incident, offered to help decorate the observation deck, where we eventually decided to hold the small ceremony. Sil's clan elders, the same ones who had nearly been lost during the tampering incident, insisted on traveling from their settlement to attend in person, despite the obvious logistical challenges involved in arranging transport for elderly members of a fragile species across such distances. On the day of the ceremony itself, the observation deck had been transformed from its usual quiet, sparsely populated space into something warm and welcoming. Strings of soft lighting, borrowed from various trading posts across the station, cast a gentle glow across the gathered crowd. A mixture of human and Ithra guests stood together, along with several Voran traders and Ondu engineers, who had grown curious enough about our story to attend as well. Sil stood beside me wearing a formal robe, woven from the same intricate pattern as the joining cloth we had spent the previous evening completing together, the fabric shimmering slightly under the soft lighting. I wore my best clothes, which admittedly were not particularly formal given my usual work as a mechanic, though Diane had insisted on helping me find something suitable from the station's limited clothing exchange. An Ithra elder, one of the very individuals whose lives we had helped protect weeks earlier, stepped forward to guide us through the traditional ceremony. Her voice, though weathered with age, carried clearly across the gathered crowd as she explained the significance of the joining cloth we had created together, how it represented two separate threads choosing to weave themselves into something stronger than either could be alone. The Ithra people have learned through difficult experience, the elder said, addressing the mixed crowd of species gathered before us, that survival often depends on finding allies willing to stand beside us, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. This union began as a practical necessity, born from fear and desperation, yet it has grown into something far more meaningful, a true partnership built on mutual respect and protection. She turned toward me, her large dark eyes studying my face carefully. Ryan Cole, you were given no choice in this bond initially, yet you chose again and again to honor it fully, even when doing so brought danger and difficulty into your life. Will you continue choosing this path, standing beside Sil and her people, not merely as an obligation, but as a genuine commitment? I will, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. The elder then turned toward Sil. Sil of the Ithra clan, will you continue standing beside Ryan, sharing both the burdens and joys that come with this bond, contributing your own strength and wisdom to this partnership? I will, Sil said, her voice clear and confident, a stark contrast to the nervous, hesitant tone she had used during our very first conversation weeks earlier. We completed the ceremony by folding the joining cloth together one final time, tying it securely around both our joined hands, a symbolic representation of two separate paths, now permanently woven together. The gathered crowd erupted into a mixture of cheers, soft chiming sounds from Ithra guests, and enthusiastic applause from the humans present, creating a chaotic but joyful celebration that felt entirely fitting for two people whose story had begun in such an unexpected way. Later that evening, after most of the celebration had wound down and only a few close friends remained, I found myself standing on the observation deck with Sil, watching cargo ships slowly drift past the station's viewing window, their running lights creating small trails of brightness against the endless dark of space beyond. Do you remember what you told me that very first day? Sil asked quietly, leaning against my side as we watched the ships pass. Which part? I asked. There was a lot happening that day. You said your mother taught you not to turn away someone who needed help, simply because it was inconvenient, she said. I have thought about that lesson often over these past weeks. What made you think about it tonight specifically? Sil turned to look up at me, her expression thoughtful. I have realized something important about your species during our time together, she said. The reputation my people feared, the unpredictability that made humanity seem dangerous, it was never truly about aggression or violence. It was about this instinct you carry, this refusal to calculate whether helping someone is worth the risk before actually helping them. I thought about that observation carefully, recognizing the truth in it even though I had never fully articulated it that way myself. I guess we just don't like watching people get hurt when we're capable of doing something about it, I said. Doesn't matter if it's convenient or not. That instinct saved my clan, Sil said softly, not through violence or force, but through steady, consistent presence, through people showing up simply because it was the right thing to do, without needing elaborate justification first. I wrapped my arm gently around her shoulders, pulling her closer as we continued watching the ships drift silently past the station. For what it's worth, I said, I think your people taught me something valuable too. Before you walked up to me that day, I never really thought much about what it meant to protect someone, to actually take responsibility for another person's safety and well-being. I was just a mechanic fixing engines, keeping to myself, not thinking too much about the bigger picture. And now? Sil asked. Now I understand a little better why some things are worth standing up for, even when it's complicated or dangerous, I said, even when you don't fully understand what you're getting into at first. Syl smiled softly, resting her head against my shoulder as the last cargo ship disappeared from view beyond the observation window. I believe our joining cloth chose its pattern wisely then, she said. Two threads that seemed entirely mismatched at first glance, yet somehow woven together into something surprisingly strong. We stood together in comfortable silence for a long while after that, watching the quiet rhythm of the station continue around us, both of us aware that whatever challenges the future still held, we would face them together, not as a practical arrangement born from desperate circumstances, but as genuine partners who had chosen each other freely, one small step at a time. Halvan Station eventually returned to its usual rhythm of trade and business, the excitement surrounding our unusual bond, gradually fading into simply another accepted part of station life. Other species occasionally still glanced curiously in our direction, remembering the story of the small Ithra bride and her human mechanic partner, though the whispers had long since shifted from confusion to quiet respect. Syl's clan continued their trading operations without further interference from the Doran Combine, their settlement protected not merely by formal accord documentation, but by the genuine, demonstrated willingness of an entire community to defend one of their own without hesitation. As for me, I remained exactly what I had always been, a mechanic fixing engines and coolant systems across Halvan Station's busy docking bays, yet somehow, that simple identity had expanded into something far larger than I ever expected on that ordinary Tuesday morning when a tiny alien first walked up and changed the entire course of my life with a single unexpected sentence.